Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the fourth session of the Civil Society program hosted by the Georgian Civil Society Organization, Institute for Development of Freedom of Information, shortly IDFI. This session is a part of the 54th annual meeting of the ADB Board of Governors. It is my pleasure and honor to host you during this session titled Advancing the Progress Towards Achieving SDGs Post-COVID-19. I am 𝐏𝐫𝐸𝐬𝐬, Executive Director of the IDFI, and I will be your moderator today. Let me remind you that this session is live streamed via Facebook and YouTube channels of the NGO and Civil Society Center of the ADB. The working language will be English, and there will be a sign-in language available at the lower right of the screen. During our session, we will be discussing the experience of Georgia and Armenia in institutionalizing and localizing SDGs, with the emphasis on the importance of adopting a participatory approach in this process. The panelists will also share with us their reflections on the effects of current COVID-19 pandemic on the process of achieving the SDGs and the national levels. Institutionalization of SDGs, designating a responsible government entity with the overall mandate of overseeing the process of SDGs implementation and designing approaches to ensuring systematic involvement and participation of civil society organizations as well as the wider society in this process is very crucial for achieving SDGs. Without strong institutions with the overall mandate of overseeing the process and individual state entities responsible for achieving particular goals, implementation of sustainable development goals would be not possible. The topic of the panel discussion will directly relate it to the ADB's operational priority 6, strengthening governance and institutional capacity, as participants will be discussing the process of institutionalizing SDGs, the mandates and resources of relevant state institutions and needs for the further development. The topic of adopting a participatory approach in this process of SDGs implementation will be one of the main cornerstones of the discussion today. Georgia as well as Armenia have much to share when it comes to government and civil society cooperation in the direction. The panel discussion at large will aim at supporting dialogue between the governmental and non-governmental actors and identifying new areas for further cooperation. Thus, the panel discussion will complement ADB's Operation Priority 7, fostering regional cooperation and integration. The first hour of the session will be devoted to presentations and speeches. There will be 5 distinguished speakers in all. Each speaker will have 10 minutes for their presentations, and 2 speakers will be representing Georgia, while 2 others will be sharing the experience of Armenia, after which we will get acquainted with the perspective of the ADB in regards to SDGs after the COVID-19 crisis. This will be followed by question and answer and discussion session. Your participation and active involvement will be particularly useful at this stage for delivering an informative session. Please, I encourage you and feel free to ask questions using the chat box. After the end of the discussion, we will see the visual recap of the event prepared by the team of designers, which is additional and very interesting process. The panelists of the session come from government as well as civil society backgrounds, thus facilitating dialogue and sharing the experience cross-cutting. This also ensures that our attendees receive well-balanced information on the achievements and challenges of Georgia and Armenia when it comes to implementing sustainable development goals on national and local levels. The first distinguished speaker is Ms. Natia Tsicaradze, and she will be representing the government of Georgia, the government administration. Ms. Tsicaradze will introduce us to the progress and road toward achieving SDGs in Georgia. Natia currently works at the Policy Planning Unit of Policy Planning and Coordination Department at the administration of the government of Georgia. She serves as an SDG national coordinator and oversees the nationalization, implementation and monitoring process of sustainable development goals in Georgia. Prior to her current role, she served in various positions in both in private and public sector. With this, I would like to give the floor to our first speaker, Ms. Natia Tsicaradze. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to share with you my opinions and also the process of SDG implementation in Georgia. And I'm very honored to have the opportunity to contribute my thoughts to your panel discussion as well. And I'm really very thankful for inviting me for this conference. And I'm glad to talk about the process of SDG nationalization and implementation in Georgia. The adoption of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development with its 17 Sustainable Development Goals at the UN Summit in 2015 was undoubtedly a huge success, and Georgia was one of the first countries that actively endorsed the Sustainable Development Goals and started integrating them in its domestic policy agenda. And the administration, from the beginning, the administration of the government of Georgia was identified as a main institution that would be in charge of all the matters related to integration, implementation and monitoring of the SDG on a national level. And Georgia was also one of the first countries who submitted its first voluntary national review in 2016, and as the process was, it was the beginning of the process. This report reflected mostly the methodology that we have applied, as well as the progress to date in prioritizing the most appropriate goals for Georgia and to refine them, as well as the indicators of success based on our perception of the country's priorities by the time. And at this initial stage, administration of the government established a technical working group and involved the experts of various sectoral line ministries. And National Statistic Office was also very actively involved in the process in order to facilitate the landing of sustainable development goals at national level and to discuss the process of nationalization. And the working group prioritized specific goals and targets that were relevant to the Georgian context at the time. And at the beginning, we had 14 goals nationalized, but later we nationalized all 17 goals and we announced them as priorities for the country. A bit later, we started developing national documents, national metrics, and in this process, international as well as national experts were involved to support the government, not only on the elaboration of the document, but also in the capacity building of responsible agencies. And the localization of SDGs has been done according to the national context, as well as challenges and opportunities, and elaborated through the wide consultation, both within the government and with civil society stakeholders. The document described nationalized 17 goals, 93 targets, and almost 202 indicators, and set out the institutional and procedural structure for monitoring of their implementation. And in 2019, this document was approved by the government of Georgia. The matrix includes all the necessary information that will guide lead government institution in the process of implementing 2030 agenda. And namely, the matrix reflects global as well as the Georgian adjusted targets and goals as well. The document also includes indicators that should be achieved by 2030. And also we have baseline indicators, which mostly come from 2015, in order to measure the achievement of the targets. In addition, the lead agency indicated in the matrix takes responsibility for achieving the relevant targets, and monitoring of the implementation of SDG is conducted in accordance with each line of the matrix. In 2017, the government of Georgia established Sustainable Development Goal Council to ensure the monitoring and efficient coordination of SDG implementation in the country. And the council has 4 thematic working group according to the special areas, and this group are social inclusion, economic development, democratic governance, and sustainable energy and environmental protection. And the administration of the government of Georgia performs the function of secretariat of the council. Mainly, the council makes political decisions while the working groups work on thematic direction and coordinates the work of involved institutions in this process, and also collecting the data and ensure the SDG integration into national policy documents. The head of the administration of the government of Georgia is the chair of the council, and we also have the co-chair, who is the UN resident, permanent resident in Georgia. We also have in the council, the member of the councils are almost come from almost all the governmental institutions. And we also have in the council the member of the civil society, and international organization, as well as the parliament and the municipalities. The council has its statute, and we also have the terms of references of the thematic working groups to ensure proper participation, as well as a mechanism for increasing of the ownership of the civil society in the process. Also, for the monitoring of the SDG implementation on national level, we have applied quite an innovative approach, and we developed an electronic monitoring system that enables effective and transparent monitoring of the national agenda of the UN Sustainable Goals. And the electronic monitoring tool supports the distribution of up-to-date information about the performance of public agencies on individual targets and indicators of the SDGs. And the main goal of the portal is to inform the public about the progress of the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals and other issues related to the goals. And also, this web portal provides regularly updated information about the activities that are related to the SDGs, and also the activities of the Sdg Interagency Council, which is tasked with the supervising the progress and monitoring the Sustainable Development Goals in Georgia. And we have also created SDG tracker that is integrated into this website. And anyone who is interested to know more about the implementation of the SDG or any other projects or activities related to this process can check and also to check the progress of the implementation of the goals. Anyone can check with this tracker according to the year or according to the goals. In 2020, Georgia submitted its second winner. It was a bit different year due to the COVID-19. And at this initial stage, the Secretariat developed an outline and established priority areas in line with the main government program and its agenda. And considering the fact that it was the first year that the countries was reporting through their domestically determined priority perspective, the Georgia winner described progress toward almost all the goals, but the main, we've chosen the main three areas and we made an in-depth analysis through this area, and this was human capital development and social inclusion, economic development and democratic governance. And to ensure the whole of government approach in this process, we use the existing SDG institutional mechanism that I've already talked about it, and we use this mechanism for the preparation of the winner 2020, and administration of the government of Georgia closely work with all line ministries and as well as the National Statistics Office of Georgia. And the process was conducted in close cooperation with the SDG Council thematic working groups, which are composed of representatives of various sectors like the state institutions, civil society organization, international organization, as well as private sector and academia. Due to the COVID situation, our agenda for the winner preparation process was totally changed, and we lead all the process online, including the consultation with the various stakeholders. Also, it required an effort to various stakeholders, as the draft report of the winner has been shared with this existing institutional framework, but it was shared online due to the COVID situation. And it has been made also available on the special SDG website to encourage public debate and opinion. And in total, we got 200 comments and feedbacks from more than 20 organizations, including international organizations. And most of the comments and suggestions that we got and that was relevant was reflected in the final report of the winner. And after the refinement and changes, this report was submitted to the Council for approval, and after this report was approved by the Council, it was submitted to the UNDESA. And despite that, the winner presentation at a high-level political forum, we also held the side event in the framework of this high-level political forum, and we had this side event in cooperation with Estonia, and it was about the education and education for all. This was the main topic of this side event. I also would like to mention the topic that is related to the SDG audit in Georgia. For the purpose of the further refinement and of integration process, and to support the establishment of a proper fundamentals for successful realization of the goals, State Audit Office of Georgia assessed the national preparedness for implementation of the SDGs, and they issued some recommendation based on the audit result. We are still in the process of working on these recommendations. Some of them is already implemented, and now we are in the process to develop, to to be prepared for the landing of the SDGs on a municipality level, because this was one of the main recommendations that was issued by the state office, and we already developed an action plan. And we are planning to present this action plan to the Council of the SDG. We are planning to hold the council meeting in the near future, and after the approval of these documents, so we will start working in municipalities. As the world now is in the battle with the COVID-19 pandemic, the importance of sustainable development gains a new impetus, and we need to redouble our efforts in order to remain the progress that we already achieved in this process. And I do hope that all countries together will manage to remain on the path of the positive progress towards Agenda 2030. I have...
Nadia, I'm very sorry, but I have to jump in because
yes.
we are...
I will mention just the concluding remarks. Yeah. I know that I know that I held your attention for long enough, so I will conclude now with just one final point that I wish to stress how pivotal the following years will be in the journey to sustainable development. And I see that we are at a road that will fraught with difficulties and challenges and struggles. So in spite of the difficulties, I convinced that together we can take a pathway that will deliver us to a brighter future for all. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much for sharing very interesting information. Actually, IDFI has a long experience working with the government administration for years in the direction of SDGs, and listening to you, actually, it reminds me how well we cooperated and how it is important to engage and involve different stakeholders, especially civil society organizations, in this process. With this, actually, it is quite interesting now to listen from the civil society perspective about all these processes, and especially on behalf of IDFI, the organization that I represent. We have the very distinguished speaker, Nino Merebashvili-Fisher, who for years has been working on the direction of SDGs in our organization, and she has quite good experience in cooperating with different stakeholders, especially the government of Georgia, on working on SDGs. Nino has education in law and multiple years of experience working for non-governmental organizations within the auspices of various projects financed by international development partners. Nino joined our team, the Institute for Development of Freedom of Information, in 2014, and has been working on various areas of good governance since then. Especially, I would like to underline the SDGs direction. And please, Nino, present on behalf of IDFI your views on this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgi. Thank you to Natia for her very interesting presentation. What I would like to talk to you today about is collaboration, the practice of collaboration between civil society organizations and the government of Georgia for the common good of achieving SDGs. Natia has already touched upon the issue of how Georgia was a front runner in regards to implementing SDGs. In my presentation today, I would like to talk about the following topics. Next slide, please. Firstly, I will go a bit more into depth about the background and the situation in Georgia when the SDGs were evolving. I will talk about the practice of getting organized around the SDGs, collaboration between IDFI and public entities in that regards, the remaining challenges and needs and recommendations. Next slide, please. As Natia already mentioned, Georgia was one of the first countries that actively endorsed the Sustainable Development Goals. and started integrating them in domestic policy agenda. As you are well aware, the UN member states agreed on the Sustainable Development Goals in September 2015, and Georgia already in 2015 started to implement them into national level. However, even though there was particularly strongly expressed political will from the side of the country to advance SDGs, Georgia did not have much experience working on similar global comprehensive agendas in the past. What I mean is Georgia was not actively engaged in the implementation of MDGs, Millennium Development Goals, that the country did not have sufficient institutional framework and experience for coordinating the process at the national level. Some of the main areas, challenging areas that were present was lack of data sources, lack of institutional setup and capacity to monitor and coordinate reporting process across SDGs in all governmental institutions, and ownership and policy linkages. The government required a great deal of input and support from local civil society organizations as well as donor organizations. Next slide, please. So what did IDFI do at that stage? We saw a need for development, assistance, and opportunity to work together with the governmental entities with the aim of addressing the challenges and implementing SDGs. Already in 2016, IDFI started to implement relevant projects with partnership with the government of Georgia. The main directions of the projects were strengthening data collection and coordination capacities of the leading SDG mechanisms, increasing the capacity of civil servants to effectively monitor SDGs implementation, use multiple public awareness tools. During the period of the project implementation, we had various public awareness events. One of them was street art event, which I think is particularly noteworthy since it also attracted lots of attention and was attended by more than 100 people. And the IDFI also cooperated with the Parliament of Georgia and helped the Parliament to develop its open Parliament action plan, one of the main commitments of which was promoting and monitoring the implementation of SDGs by the Parliament of Georgia. Next slide, please. I will briefly go through, since Natia already touched upon time, I will briefly go through the results of the common cooperation between IDFI and the government of Georgia. Firstly, it was the SDGs metrics, which is a Microsoft Excel document containing information on nationalized goals, targets, and indicators. Then there was institutional setup, setting up SDGs Council and working groups. And it should be noted that in the working groups, every relevant stakeholder has the opportunity to be involved and thus participate in the process of SDGs implementation. The development of the electronic monitoring system for sustainable development goals, the front end of the website, the front end of the system is the website, which is already developed and which, although it is not very active, but serves as a good basis for the future activities in order to make sure that the wider public is well informed about the ongoing processes when it comes to SDGs implementation. Even though there still needs to be lots of activities undertaken with the aim of raising awareness on SDGs in Georgia, we find that the activities that were implemented in cooperation with the government of Georgia did have a positive impact in that regard. Next slide, please. Now I would like to briefly talk about the remaining challenges. Firstly, I would like to highlight that the title of the SDGs Council, the full title, is Interagency Council on Sustainable Development Goals, and the title implies that the primary purpose of the Council is ensuring better coordination of SDGs nationalization process among the state institutions. However, according to the decree as well as the practice, all of the relevant stakeholders have the possibility to be involved in the process, so it kind of leaves the impression that the practice, the regulations, and the title of the Council are not very much in line with each other. The Council composition, there is lack of legislative branch and municipal representation in the Council composition. There are no representatives of the central or local legislative branch among the Council voting members, since according to the rules of operation, chairpersons of the parliamentary committees are entitled to attend the Council meetings. And when it comes to the representation of municipalities, only mayors or mayor representatives are entitled to attend the meetings. Process of composition of the working groups. In order to be a member of the working group, one should have 5 years of experience of working in relevant field and relevant resources enabling him or her to be the member of the working group. The wording of the text gives a wide scope of interpretation and causes risks of taking subjective decisions on the topic of the working group membership. And lastly, transparency and accountability of the Council activities. Even though there were important steps, positive steps taken in this direction, recently Idfi finds that there still are problems in this direction. The decree does not, there are no regulations which would include any provisions on publishing meeting agendas and minutes. And Idfi finds that publishing this information is crucial for ensuring that the wider public is proactively informed about the activities of the Council and its working groups. Next slide, please. Here I would like to briefly talk about the process of preparing the Voluntary National Review of Georgia, the most recent one, which Natia also mentioned in her report. I would like to stress that even though there was, to some level, the involvement of relevant stakeholders in the process, we find that the involvement was at a later stage and it could have been done better. And I think that the government administration itself well internalizes this, and one of the challenges in this regard was the ongoing pandemic as well, which might have been on the way of ensuring the full cooperation and involvement of all relevant stakeholders in the process of preparing the voluntary national review. But hopefully the problems will be internalized and taken into consideration in the future. And I would also like to highlight the lack of awareness raising activities recently, and also problems in regards to public participation in policy development, which is a bit broader issue, but it is also closely related to SDGs. Next slide, please. Since I don't have much time left, I would just like to share with you the results of our research, which we conducted in order to see to what level national policy documents were linked with the SDGs, and we found out that there was no linkage in 28% of the cases. There was full linkage in case of 23% and partial linkage in case of 49%. There were also other studies conducted in that regard, including by the government, through the government administration itself, the results of which were a bit different, but methodologies of the research were different. And I do think that the research which was conducted by us was mostly in detail, since we had a look at the linkages at the level of the indicators, and thus it was very comprehensive and overwhelming. Next slide, please. Needs and recommendations. Based on what we have discussed today already, it is very important to ensure engagement of relevant stakeholders in the process of SDGs integration in Georgia. This is partially already done through the working groups, but more needs to be done in that direction in order to ensure their effective implementation in the process. It is very important to raise public awareness on SDGs, and especially in the municipalities in Georgia. It is crucial to increase representation of the legislative branch in the SDGs Council and to give more leverages to the municipalities themselves to be involved in the process in an effective manner. It is crucial to increase the transparency and accountability of the SDGs Council. And it is also very important to internalize existing problems in the area of linkages between SDGs and national policy documents and take relevant steps to tackle them. And lastly, I would just like to express my hope for the future that we will continue to cooperate with the government of Georgia, and also hope that we as well as all other relevant stakeholders will have the possibility to be effectively and fully involved in the preparation of voluntary national reviews in the future. Thank you, 𝐾𝐝𝐬𝐬, and I will be happy to answer questions and participate in the discussion afterwards with our honorable speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nino, especially fitting in time so perfectly and professionally, and I really would like to kindly ask all speakers to fit in the time frame. We have 10 minutes for each presentations, because we will have the additional time for a broader discussion after the session. So, Nino, thank you once again for your presentation. I'm sure it was quite interesting for the audience, especially listening to the opinion of the civil society organizations on the process of SDGs implementation in Georgia, and also sharing the research about the linkages. I'm sure it was quite a new issue for the audience to know and listen about, and I think it was quite useful to include this, the results of the research, as well as the recommendation that I'm sure will be useful for the government administration for the future work on SDGs. Now I would like to switch to Armenia, and our third speaker, Ellen Zahradian, will share with us the unique experience of Armenia from the lessons of the SDGs Innovation Lab. Ms. Ellen joined the SDGs Innovation Lab team in August 2019, and she's a former program coordinator at Child Development Foundation and a former senior project consultant at the Council of Europe office in Yerevan. Ellen has an education in law and European legal studies. Ellen, please share with us the experience and work and recommendations from the SDGs Innovation Lab. Please, the floor is yours, Ellen, and we will be happy to listen to your presentation.
Hello and greetings from UNDP's Armenia National SDG Innovation Lab. I'm thrilled to be here today and to present Armenia's innovative journey towards achieving SDGs. Next slide, please. I will be presenting a brief overview of the National Innovation Lab, which is the joint initiative of the government of Armenia and the United Nations, and is the first ever national country support platform by the government and the UN to accelerate the SDG implementation. We are here to disrupt policy and decision-making practices in Armenia, making them more evidence-based and data-driven. And we mainstream innovation in public policy and public service delivery through 4 service lines, which are data science, behavioral science, design thinking, and we are currently exploring alternative scenario development. Next slide, please. We have expanded significantly since our inception, and now we are happy to cover more than 9 sectors and mainstream innovation in these sectors. As you'll see on your screens, we have also established successful partnerships with some very prominent institutions internationally, and we are happy that our innovative experience was also contagious for UNDP offices across the globe, namely UNDP Tunisia, Honduras, and Colombia, and we are happy to embark on this journey of SDG implementation in Armenia and mainstream innovation in this regard as well. Next slide, please. I'd like to briefly talk about the lab's role in the institutional structure of SDG implementation in Armenia. As I've mentioned, being a joint organization established by the government of Armenia and the UNDP, we have the privilege of working with both national counterparts and the private sector, as well as the international community, to advance the SDG implementation in Armenia. We are happy to have the Deputy Prime Minister's Office's support on almost all components of our projects and on our commitment towards advancing the SDGs in Armenia. And being the member of the task force on SDG 16 in particular in Armenia with some of the most prominent institutions such as the Ombudsman's Office, the government representatives, the National Statistics Committee, makes us a one-of-a-kind innovation facility that has taken the lead in bringing innovation to disrupt conventional SDG practices in Armenia and beyond. Next slide, please. Being an innovation facility, of course, we anchor a lot of our projects on data and the use of big data sources to offer real-time data repositories for everyone who is interested in SDG progress monitoring. We study, analyze publicly available data from social media, official government websites, and the largest online travel platforms such as TripAdvisor and Booking.com. And we do this to make sure that we have first-hand information from the citizens, from the users of these platforms, and we need to make sure that their voices are heard when monitoring the SDGs in Armenia. And also the biggest advantage from our side in this regard is the access to administrative databases, and namely the access to administrative databases of the government, other public institutions, which have served as a very reliable and useful source of information to advance our efforts. Next slide, please. I'd like to present the Sdg Monitor Platform that we have recently developed, and that is one-of-a-kind AI-powered platform in Armenia aimed at interactive SDG progress monitoring. This is a joint initiative by the UNDP's Rule of Law and Sdg 16 in Armenia Reform Agenda project. And as you may see, it's also one of our projects where the Deputy Prime Minister's Office has ensured the direct ownership of the overall process. Over 10 public institutions are with us on this journey, and since the beginning they were with us when mapping the data and collecting the necessary information to monitor the progress on SDG 16. And we are also very thrilled to establish partnerships with the Oslo Governance Center and the Global Data Barometer, for which we serve as national hub. This platform is unique and different because it offers alternative, innovative approaches to conventional data collection and SDG progress monitoring. And in the next slide, I'll tell you about our journey. Next slide, please. So the process of developing the Sdg Monitor Platform was quite ambitious and very rewarding in the meantime. We have gone through 6 main phases of mapping data. To begin with, we started mapping data from public institutions, focusing on conventional sources first. Once the data was mapped, we could identify the data gaps and bottlenecks. And as an innovation facility, we were here to offer alternative tools and methodologies to fill that data gap. So we introduced artificial intelligence and machine learning approaches to fill the data gap, of course, making sure that these are in line with the ethical standards of the platforms that we gather data from. So once we identified the innovative data collection mechanisms and sources, we embarked on the journey of innovative data collection from conventional sources. Those were the public institutions that we initially mapped the data from, and non-conventional sources, Facebook and eDraft, which is the official government website for the publication of data, draft legal acts. And once the data was collected through scraping, we continued on the phase of data collection, data and analytics, and started analyzing the data and extracting findings and insights. Once the data was analyzed, the Sdg monitoring platform was designed and developed to offer the users the real-time experience of seeing what the data revealed. Next slide, please. Once identifying the data gaps, we understood that some data was missing on SDG 16.7.2, the proportion of population who believe decision-making is inclusive and responsive, and that's when we went to exploring alternative innovative data sources. And we started gathering data from Facebook, and namely we scraped the official Facebook profiles of current and former government officials. And as a result, 40 profiles were scraped with over 60,000 Facebook posts since 2016, and 100,000 comments were analyzed. And we were able to identify the proportion of population who believe decision making is inclusive and responsive. And we also extracted some information and data from the eDraft, official government website for the publication of draft legal acts, namely with regard to seeing citizen participation and discussion in the discussions of the draft legal acts. Next slide, please. This was quite an ambitious project in Armenia and for the UNDP in particular, and we were happy to discuss it with colleagues across UNDP in other countries, as I've mentioned. And we are currently exploring opportunities to scale up this platform, the Sdg Monitor Platform, both in terms of scope and geography, namely to include new SDGs, because currently it is piloted on SDG 16 only and is available on beta version. And we want to expand the geography to include more countries and visualize data on these countries. Aside from the scale up in scope and geography, we also want to offer new innovative mechanisms, tools and methodologies, as well as explore new and more data sources. And of course, we couldn't ignore the fact of having COVID-19, and we are interested in integrating a COVID-19 dashboard to show the pre and post-COVID reality of advancing the SDGs in Armenia and also other countries. Next slide, please. And of course, being an innovation facility and being a one-of-a-kind research hub for the government and the UNDP, we integrate design thinking methodologies and tools to feed policies and the research with evidence. And this would have not been possible without the support of our SDG champions, namely the SDG Task Force and the UNRC office, which has taken the leadership on many components of the project. Next slide, please. Since I'm short of time, I'll not take too much on this slide, but I'm happy to also share with you, colleagues, the UNDP Armenia's non-traditional financing mechanisms for development. As you can see, we have a very broad portfolio of innovative financing mechanisms to attract private capital and action for the SDGs, such as private sector funds, seed capital for public policy innovation, investments in technology-driven SDG-oriented ventures, market intelligence products, and social impact and other types of bonds. Next slide, please. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to address your questions and hear your opinion about the experience of Armenia. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ellen, for this presentation. Actually, it was very interesting to listen to the projects you have implemented, those of analysis that you have done in the frames of the SDGs Innovation Lab, and I'm sure this was quite interesting, not only for the audience but also for the speakers to learn what was the practice in Armenia, how you are supporting the development of SDGs and in the implementation process. And I think now it will be really interesting to listen from the perspective of the civil society, and the next speaker who will be talking about the Agenda 2030 and SDG summaries in Armenia is Honorable Speaker Hegrin Manasyan. I'm especially expressing my gratitude towards Hegrin because it was hard days for her. She was directly affected by COVID-19, and as she found time for us, this is really very much appreciated from our side. And she can speak now on behalf of the civil society about the SDGs process. Ms. Hegrin will represent Caucasus Research Resource Center, CRRC Armenia, prior to joining CRRC Armenia, Dr. Manasyan has been actively involved in projects funded by the different international development organizations such as UNDP, World Bank, 𝐏𝐻𝐶, and implemented in Armenia and aimed at strengthening domestic capacities for high-quality economic research and education. Ms. Manasyan has a doctoral degree in economics with broad experience in research, teaching, and policy analysis. Thank you once again, Erin, for being with us, and floor is yours. Please present on behalf of CRRC what is the experience and work of the organization. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Georgi, for involving me in this challenging endeavor. It is really very important to talk and share, discuss SDG developments in all the countries, especially it is important for Armenia that was very hard hit by pandemic, but also we could say that this is also post-war situation which puts additional pressure in thinking over the SDGs and see how we could advance and whatever is omitted or left behind, how we can catch up in our country, though it goes to many countries, but for Armenia it is of vital importance. So personally, I and the CRRC institutionally were part of SDG nationalization process. Therefore, I'll be talking a bit about the beginning, a little bit of CRRC Armenia, and then SDG nationalization process and recent developments. So CRRC is an institution that is to address national and regional, next slide please, to address regional and national socioeconomic and political challenges via high quality data collection, analysis and enhancement of the research capacity. If in brief, then CRRC Armenia, along with CRRC Georgian, CRRC Azerbaijan, they do care on policy-oriented, applied, data-driven research in social sciences. Therefore, also policy recommendations are coming out, and we do work with the government institutions as well as much as possible, along with international organizations that are dealing with the government. We are taking care of capacity building in the South Caucasus, and we do believe that this open data culture is the most important thing that leads to transparency and accountability. And as a sample, the flagship production, the Caucasus Barometer of the CRRCs, has open data analysis platform that enables any person, even without any software skills, to analyze journalists, for example, media people who don't have special software skills. They can simply analyze and then report about the trends in Armenia, in Caucasus as well. Also, we do try to raise awareness, and we have much more activities. Next, please. Just a couple of words on nationalization of sustainable development goals. I do believe that what Natia described for Georgia, it is quite common. And for this initial stage, when the roadmap was developed and shared, CSO participation in SDG development process, monitoring process, from my perspective, was much higher than it is currently. Next, please. By then, there were 4 subgroups of interagency committees. there was one interagency committee, and it had 4 subgroups, which is similar to Georgia. So different goals were treated. Particularly, I was in the group for social subgroup led by the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs, and there were a few representatives of CSOs only in that subgroup. In others, especially in environmental subcommittee, there were much more. Next, please. However, it is very important to note for now that this is not the case. The new council is formed just a year ago. I guess it was April 2020 when the National Council was formed, and it included mostly representatives from ministries, from National Assembly, and just 7 NGO representatives are in this National Sustainable Development Council. Which, from my perspective, is a step back from the previous experience, previous mechanisms. So how Armenia was trying to contributing to SDG monitoring? We were accepting projects kindly offered by a CSO Partnership for Development Effectiveness. We already implemented 5 projects. In 2020, we had even 2 projects from CSO Partnerships, CPDE, that cares on that. And if will be, I will not be listing because you can find the outputs on our website. Next, please. CRRC Armenia conducted also other projects that are COVID-19 purely related. And the first one was our initiative to figure out what is the attitudes, perceptions of general population. That was Facebook survey that brought 8,000 answers, and the responses were provided to the government to help them to set up measures to prevent pandemic spread and undertake many other measures. Next, please. I see that my time is diminishing very fastly. So what is obvious in Armenia, that comes from another one of the projects conducted for the World Bank. So many people lose their incomes and financial situation worsened because of pandemic. Many lost their jobs, therefore they were expecting some support from the government, from employers. But it might not be forever, therefore some other mechanisms and approaches were needed. Next, please. So here, if you will be checking which kind of projects we are implementing, right now we have one that is called Community Poverty Reduction Know-How. And we will be trying to employ multidimensional poverty measurement, and it will include also COVID Impact Index. It's a project, 3-year project, supported by European Union. However, it will be helping to see what's going on at community level, because our SDGs were mostly addressed to national levels, and it, though in the activities, it was localization was one of principles. However, the local government bodies are not heavily engaged, and also their socioeconomic development plans, regional plans, are not based on SDG targets, SDGs. Next, please. This I'll be running fastly. So coming next, please. SDG monitoring platforms. One of such platforms are voluntary national reports. Of course, Armenia already issued two, and it was reported to high levels at UN. However, it is very important that to mention that VNRs are not further communicated as soon as they are presented at UN. Their popularization, spread, etc., is not as intensive as it could be, as it needs to be. Another one is National Statistical Committee that has a platform showing all the indicators. Next, please. So this is the very nicely done web page of National Statistical Committee. Next, please. All the indicators are there. However, some are reported online, some are exploring data sources, and it is not even by goals. That's at this point, that's of course, I would welcome also SDG Innovation Lab efforts, which is a new word in this area. And I wish success to the lab in testing other projects, but also telling NGOs, researchers, local government, etc., on the experiences and the importance of the endeavor that they undertook. That's all. Thank you. I was sure that I will not be going over time, but I did. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Herin, for your presentation. Actually, timing was okay. Actually, we have pretty much time ahead, but we have also the last but not least speaker. Before I will give the floor to our next speaker. Actually, Herin, I would like to express my gratitude, especially for sharing the very interesting results of different surveys CRRC is providing, especially how the pandemic affected the population. I'm sure it was quite interesting to hear and for the audience as well. And also the analysis of the work of the of the working group of SDGs in Armenia. But of course, you will have much time after the presentations during the question and answer and discussion session to go broader and speak more about the work of CRRC, which is very important. I want to note it especially that in Georgia, in Armenia, and Azerbaijan, this organization is providing a very important statistics, surveys, etc. So thank you once again. And actually, we tried to have the gender balance in our session, but advantage went to women, and I'm very happy for that. But we have the next, last but not least, Mr. Bruno Carrasco, who will share with us the perspective of ADB in regards to SDGs after the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Carrasco is the Director General of Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department at the ADB, and Director General Carrasco leads the ADB-wide knowledge, innovation, policies, and strategies in all thematic and sector operation areas and ensures compliance with environmental and social safeguards policies. He oversees the administration of trust funds and global funding initiatives and provides advice to management on strategic and policy matters, work plans, and major direct operational matters. Thank you, Mr. Carrasco, for being with us and contributing to our session. Floor is yours, and we are with all ears listening to you.
Thank you very much, 𝐾𝐝𝐬𝐬, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to join you on this civil society program. We have worked a lot with civil society, and I want to, in this presentation, reflect a little bit the ADB perspectives on the Sustainable Development Goals after COVID-19 crisis, and try to link that up a little bit more with the civil society engagement. So next slide, please. So our strategy 2030 is our long-term corporate strategy, and it guides our operations to support developing member countries, including to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Under Strategy 2030, we have Operational Priority 6, which 𝐾𝐝𝐬𝐬 had mentioned at the outset, and that recognizes the role of civil society as part of the transformative agenda. In this context, it notes the importance of ADB collaboration on projects with civil society in order to get higher quality projects and, of course, greater inclusiveness. It also calls for strengthening collaboration to tap the unique strengths of civil society, including the local presence, and I'll touch upon this a little bit later, as well as the specialized knowledge. We have examples of how we operate with civil society. So recently in Afghanistan, as part of the preparatory work for the country partnership strategy, we had consultations through NGOs in the country across 5 provinces to help complete the assessment on fragile and conflict-affected situations. As part of our stakeholder consultation, we also consult regularly with civil society, including recently with our FCAS and SIDS approach, and also in the ongoing work in terms of the update to our safeguards. In terms of our commitment to civil society, we recently introduced an indicator, and that indicator measures the engagement of ADB in its portfolio with civil society. And of 86 completed projects in 2020, approximately 50%, a little less, 48% had planned civil society engagement. If I now look at the right-hand slide, turning to the Sustainable Development Goals, we have a tagging process where all our projects, our TAs, are tagged across 2 major categories, sector as well as themes. And by way of example, in 2019, we had 31% of our investments contributed to SDG 9, resilient infrastructure. And on the thematic side, 69% supported gender equality. Next slide, please. As many of you would have seen before, this chart on the left-hand slide, we are far away from being able to meet the SDGs across Asia-Pacific. And in some contexts, or in some cases rather, we have even regressed in terms of some of the SDGs. We do recognize that there is a very important role for SDGs. And we do recognize that CSOs, again, are very important to help us including in the recovery of the ADB CPRO programs that were provided to countries to address recovery efforts. We have done some work with our knowledge groups, including a governance brief that you see in place. And it brings out a little bit more how some of the advantages can be materialized in terms of working with civil society. As far as the pandemic is concerned, it has indeed affected very strongly lives and livelihoods across Asia Pacific. It has exposed social, economic, and environmental vulnerabilities, and we need to reinforce the need to address the overriding principle of leaving no one behind. Unfortunately, as a result of the decline in economic activity in 2020, there has been a loss of about from $1.4 to $2.2 trillion in terms of GDP, and more concerning for us is the increase in extreme poverty that has gone up by 78 million people. Next slide, please. If I now look at the very important role, which is localizing sustainable development goals. You will have seen perhaps this reference that 2/3 of the 169 SDG operational targets involve subnational governments. And here, if you look at the chart on the left slide, you see two main features coming out. First, across Asia Pacific, many countries still have a very limited devolution or devolvement of expenditure and revenue assignments to subnational government. And then in some of the countries where you have greater devolution, we see that there are imbalances, the vertical imbalances where the revenue generation is not able to address the expenditure needs. In order for us to be able to develop a more holistic approach towards sustainable development goals and focusing at the subnational level, we have entered partnerships with UNDP, with UNESCAP, and with OECD. And as part of that work, what we're trying to do is put a framework that allows us to be more effective in our operations. That framework is represented in the bottom right side, where we have institutional strengthening and policy coherence, including the importance of the VNRs that we've heard before. We take into account the importance of building partnerships and knowledge solutions, particularly with many actors, including civil society, that has some relative comparative advantage in certain areas. We do recognize also what has been heard before, financing still remains a very big issue. And what Ellen and others have mentioned earlier, the importance of data and being able to generate data to better monitor performance. So these are some of the areas that we're looking at in terms of our framework. Next slide, please. So if we look at the financing side, we recognize that while we've made a lot of progress on that left chart, where funding has gone from $2 trillion to just slightly over $6 trillion. This is across developing economies worldwide. You can see also the importance of both domestic public and private sector financing towards the SDGs. In Asia Pacific, UNESCAP has estimated that in order to meet the SDGs by 2030, we will require approximately $1.5 trillion annually through to 2030. That brings to the forefront the importance of supporting countries in terms of their tax generation capacity, the domestic resource mobilization agenda. And as we see, many countries across Asia Pacific are still unable to generate that minimum of about 15% of tax to GDP ratios, which really is the minimum to be able to support SDGs on a more sustainable basis. And then we see also some digression where countries have actually gone down from 2010 to 2019. Next slide, please. So in this slide, we want to recognize that in addition to the weak financing, there's also significantly weak institutional capacity. And this is very, very critical. We need to make sure that institutions are strong and that they are able to have an important role. As a result of COVID-19, a lot of these institutions have further weakened, and that has put even more pressure in terms of the rolling out of the SDGs and the monitoring of the SDGs. For that reason, it is important to work with civil society. They help us in many ways, and what you have in this bar chart is some of the different areas that civil societies contribute. You will note service delivery is a very important element, but also you have elements of advocacy, awareness raising, and even community participation, which is very, very important. I wanted also to touch a little bit on the third, after financing and institutional capacity, the data constraints. We know that many statistical offices, national statistical offices, still have not fully developed statistics at the subnational level to be able to better inform decision-making, including at subnational levels for SDGs. And here we are, again, working in partnership with other agencies to try to not just expand the national statistics to include greater coverage, but also to look at surveys and other means to be able to gauge a little bit more as to what is happening on the ground. And I think that a lot of the work that Ellen was mentioning in terms of her innovation lab are really very interesting areas to explore. Next slide, please. On this slide, wanted to just give a few examples of how ADB has been working across countries with civil society organizations. In the case of Cambodia, civil society organizations provide oversight to a program to finance COVID-19 active response and expenditure support programs. In Armenia, we have technical assistance that supports the Child Development Fund to facilitate online learning and supporting, of course, psychosocial support for learners, teachers, and parents. In Bangladesh, we have more of the conventional service delivery work in cooperation with civil societies. And here we're looking at a very important element of SDGs, availability of water and providing water resource infrastructure for better management through cooperative associations. We, of course, as part of our partnerships in SDG 17, we rely on very important contributors, including in this case, the government of Japan for the Japan Fund for Poverty Reduction, which finances a lot of our technical assistance. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, I would like to mention that we have a very strong partnership between ADB and civil society organizations to be able to achieve greater results in sustainable development goals, in particular at the subnational level. Just a few points. It does complement efforts by local public institutions in delivering services and disaster response. For those of you who saw the fast response from the civil society in the context of Typhoon Yolanda in the Philippines a few years ago, you will see the importance of civil society in terms of that early action. We need to have greater inclusion in our work, and that includes better accountability and even control of corruption as a tax on development to be able to get more out of our services. The importance also of contributing to localizing SDGs and monitoring progress. If we can't monitor, if we can't measure, if we can't monitor, we can't be able to show progress. The citizen-centric initiative of putting citizens at the front is part, again, of that important collaboration. We want to make sure that when we have our service delivery work, we are able to target pro-poor development policies, making sure it gets to the needed. And then finally, provide innovation and sustainable solution to development problems. If we put all this together, we will be working with civil society to make more effective implementation of 2030 agenda, and particularly not to leave anyone behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carrasco, for sharing information and overview of the programs the bank is providing in response to COVID-19 crisis in the region, and also about the cooperation with the civil society organizations support to somehow avoid the effect, negative effect of COVID-19 in the region, and those of the projects that you have listed was quite interesting for me to listen about. Now, actually, we have concluded the presentation part, and now we can move to the session for the questions and answers. I'm happy to let you know that we have received questions, online questions, and they somehow coincide with the questions I have drafted for myself as the moderator. And what I have noticed, actually, the presentations phrase the questions, and I'm happy that the presentations were that much of interest for the audience. So once again, thank you, thanks and gratitude to all the presenters, and I would like to share with you several of the questions we have received from the audience. First, the question about the voluntary national review process was asked by one of the attendees, and I want to direct this question to Natia, if I may. Did the VNR process consult with civil society organizations? Did the report incorporate also civil society organizations' contributions to SDGs? Natia, you're with us?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you for the question. Of course, the consultation was held with civil society organization, and not only with them, but all stakeholders from various sectors during the preparation of the VNR. As I already mentioned, due to the COVID-19, we changed our agenda during this process a bit, and all our consultation was held online. We used the existing institutional mechanism during this process, and we used the existing working groups where we shared the documents. So as I already mentioned, this working group includes all the sector of all the stakeholders from various sectors, including civil society organization, international organization, private sector and academia, and we've shared our documents electronically with all the members of the 4 thematic working groups, as well as we uploaded our first draft of the banner on our electronic system on our website, and all the interested person was able to see the draft and to make the comment. At the end, we've collected almost more than 200 recommendations and remarks from various organizations, and we've discussed them, and we've reflected most of them that was relevant and based on the evidences. If we considered the situation that we had in 2020 because of the COVID and this pandemic situation, so we managed to, in spite of that situation, we still managed to have quite a broad consultation with them. And we've also responded to all the organization who sent us the recommendation or the comments, and we responded to them with our comments, where if some of the recommendation were not reflected in the documents, so they knew about the reason of this decision.
Thank you. Maybe Herin, you can also speak on behalf of the civil society of Armenia about the process of VNR. How was the cooperation with the civil society in this process? Herin, I'm sorry, you are on mute, so can you please unmute your camera?
I am so sorry. I'm so sorry. Actually, I was going to interact with this. I was talking that while comparing VNR 2020 with VNR 2018, then the previous one, the first one, was more involving of all the stakeholders, including CSOs. For this year, it was hard also because, not only because of COVID and this war situation, but also because of institutional changes in monitoring, organizing, reorganizing the council. So the previous mechanisms were destroyed and the new ones were not yet fully established to really. I was happy to hear Natia reported about 200 recommendations. I heard from our public officials that it was quite hard to collect feedback from the civil society and other stakeholders regarding the VNR preparation stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Herin, for your intervention. Actually, we have also a general question to Armenia and Georgia. In summary, actually, Narat 𝐶𝐶𝐬𝐬𝐶𝐶 is asking a question Are Georgia and Armenia on track on their SDG targets? Nino, what's your opinion about this?
Thank you, Georgi. I think this is a very interesting question, and actually to be able to provide a comprehensive response, it would take in-depth research and so on. So what information I could provide would be based on my overall impression in working in this area, so to say. I think that when coming to SDGs, the pandemic of COVID-19 did have very negative effect on it. It just only, as Mr. Bruno Carrasco as well in his presentation highlighted, all of the horrible impacts that COVID-19 had on the poverty on the global level, and Georgia was not an exception in that regards. And also when it comes to generally the activities in regards to SDGs in order to raise awareness and ensure public availability of information to the public and like involvement of the public in the process. I think that this process was also very negatively affected. So I think that also Ħerina mentioned in her presentation that at the very beginning, when the SDGs were just starting to be implemented, the situation in regards to the involvement of CSOs was much better than it is now. And I think it is the picture is somewhat the same in case of Georgia, because I think that way more needs to be done in order to ensure achievement of SDGs and in order to ensure that there is quality dialogue between all relevant stakeholders and governmental entities and the SDGs Council in this process. So I think overall, my impression is it is not based on in-depth research, but my overall impression would be that we have to some degree gone back in that direction, and I imagine the COVID-19 was also one of the important factors in it, and hence the title of our today's discussion as well, because we are trying to see the ways on overcoming these difficulties and starting to work towards SDGs with renewed forces during and in the aftermath of COVID-19.
Thank you very much, Nino, for your comment. Ellen, maybe you can also comment on behalf of, on the case of Armenia in this regards.
Thank you for the question. I agree with Nino. This is one of the most important questions when we start talking about SDGs. Since the SDG nationalization process is still ongoing in Armenia, I'd be hesitant to answer whether we are on progress, but based on the data that we have been working with as the National SDG Innovation Lab, I can clearly state that on SDG 16 level, and that is what we are working on, we can significantly monitor the progress based on indicator level. When we compare data from the previous years and we see the progress, we can clearly state that Armenia is on track and the numbers are improving. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Well, actually, we have one question for Mr. Carrasco, and the question is about which among the countries in Asia Pacific are making strides or quite advanced in terms of SDGs localization, as we'd like to learn from their experience. If you can respond to this question. We need to unmute your mic, Bruno, first.
Sorry, very sorry for that. So yes, it is an important question, and it is a question where you again have a mixed picture. We've done some work in the past doing some comparative analysis. We have some countries that have been doing better at localizing SDGs across certain areas, education perhaps, others that are looking at much more in terms of climate change work, others doing much more on terms of partnerships. Where we have had a little bit more inroads into have been two countries, Indonesia, where they have taken the voluntary national reviews very seriously, and they have now gone on to localizing voluntary reviews that are is able to coordinate much better between what is looked at the national from the sub-national level. Other countries that also have done quite well include Taipei, China, that have done quite a bit in terms of particularly the municipal level work. So these are some examples of countries that have done well on this front. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bruno, for responding to this question. Actually, there is another question addressed by Piet Lubben, chairman of the EMTA organization in Luxembourg and Netherlands. And as the European Development Agency and NGO, we like to hear on the support of joint cooperation in the process of SDGs in the 𝐀𝐝𝐸 region, taking in account the COVID-19 pandemic. Bruno, maybe you can just briefly also mention about this from the perspective of the bank.
I can generally say that, as probably you know, the regional cooperation initiatives are very important in terms of the work that we do at ADB. Part of the initial work that we did in the outset with COVID-19 affecting countries was to make sure that closing the borders was not the solution. On the contrary, we had to maintain borders open. We needed to maintain trade and financial flows continuing to operate to maintain active economies and prevent further contraction. Within the work that we do with 𝐀𝐝𝐸𝐸 Institute, we again foster partnerships to be able to help and address some of the both cross-border considerations, but more broadly the whole idea of working within regions and obviously trying to gain, learn, and benefit from the experiences of neighboring countries. So I can't go into more detail on the specifics, but that's in pretty much a very summarized version how we've been operating with the RCI work in the context of SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you, much appreciated. Actually, I have one question to you, Bruno, about the post-pandemic period, because probably it is of an interest for the audience to know about the views and plans of the bank about the post-COVID period, taking into consideration the devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the growth and development. What do you see would be the role of the ADB after the COVID crisis, post-COVID period, in the post-COVID period, in regards to helping countries overcome severe impacts of the current pandemic?
Okay, that is a very important question. One way to describe the CPRO pandemic is to describe it as the great divider. And by that, I mean that it is affecting countries very differently, and within countries, different sectors are being affected very differently. So for example, right now, the premise is that the faster countries can inoculate their populations and be able to save lives and regain livelihoods, the faster these economies can recover, the faster we can address some of the poverty concerns that we've seen. And that is all about getting vaccines to countries as quickly as possible. And ADB has, as you know, a program for access to vaccines across Asia Pacific that is providing $9 billion to help countries to procure and access those vaccines. So that is of urgency. Within countries also, you can see that take children. You have now a disconnect between those children who have access to broadband internet, who can continue to pursue their schooling, and those who cannot. So here is another example within countries, how we need to be able to broaden last mile connectivity, in this case in terms of broadband internet, so that everyone can go to school and reduce the risk of lost generations. Similarly, across businesses, you have activities in countries where they're doing very well in the digital economy, and others who perhaps are suffering very badly across tourism and other such sectors. So we need to be able to provide support in that context. I think it's critical that we continue to support the safety nets, social safety nets, through conditional cash transfer programs that have been very effective. So again, that we don't leave anyone behind. Education, we need to move much more towards EdTech so that we can bring in a lot more of those students who are not being able to go to school to be able to get that quality education. Certainly in health, ADB is very strongly supporting the universal health coverage, looking at how we can strengthen our health systems to move towards more preventive medicine, to be able to do much more telemedicine, to be able to address some of these challenges that we saw with the COVID-19. Continuing to build resilience into our infrastructure is essential also. And here again, we need to make sure that our work is in line with Paris alignment and climate change requirements. These are some of the examples of how ADB is looking at providing needed support in a post-pandemic era. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bruno, for the overview of the plans of the ADB after the pandemic. And yes, I think the vaccination is the most important process currently that will significantly affect the somehow to overcome the pandemic and go back to the normal life. We are running out of time, and I have the final, final question to Natia, and maybe please be quite brief in your response. Mr. Carrasco has touched upon the issue of financing for SDGs in his speech, highlighting that financing for SDG remains to be one of the major challenges. In order to address the challenge, firstly, we need to evaluate the existing state of SDGs financing at national levels. As far as we know, you are working in this direction. Can you please share with us, just very briefly, the experience and challenges that you are when working towards having a clear picture on the level of financing devoted to SDGs implementation?
Thank you for the question. This is a very important question and a very challenging issue that not only Georgia, but each of the countries which are involved in this process has, and this is the challenging issue for each of the countries. And we try to link the SDG goals to the national policy documents that they have as the linkages of this SDG with other policy documents in the time that has elapsed since the first submission of national review. The Georgian government, with the support of other sector, made a sequence of steps to organically integrate the SDG into national policy documents. And to be effective, the SDG implementation, we need to deeply integrate them into the national policy process. And based on this reflection, the administration of the government of Georgia worked with the line ministries and government agencies, as well as local and international experts, and to establish a new policy planning and coordination system in Georgia. And we developed the handbook for policy planning, evaluation and assessment. And this handbook assures deep integration of the SDG in a sector policy cycle. Not only any of the newly adopted strategic documents must be drafted having in mind the linkages with the SDGs, but goals that are listed in the logical framework of any policy document should be connected with the Agenda 2030 commitments. And the logical framework of the policy document require for the operationalization of the strategies, and it should be aligned with the goals closer to the budgetary planning process. This is the approach we use to be ensure the financing and the budgetary planning process of the SDG with the policy documents that country has in each sector.
Thank you, Natia, for your comment, and thank you all for your highly informative insights on the experience of implementing SDGs at the national and local levels, and for enabling us to deliver this session devoted to discussing renewed progress towards achieving the SDGs post-COVID-19. Actually, I'm sure it was very interesting for the audience, and we hope that the experiences shared during the session will serve as the basis for working towards achieving SDGs with the renewed forces during and in the aftermath of the ongoing pandemic. Actually, the ADB team made my task easier to summarize the session, and before closing our session, we have the designers providing us with a visual recap of the session. We have the TOEFL creatives and representative Desiree, who prepared the visualization of our session, and I would like to share now the designer's work. Please.
Thank you, Georgie. So as you can see on your screen, that's the visual summary that I created. Thank you everyone for such a rich discussion. I'll just walk you through it. We started with Georgie setting the scene on how this is about strengthening governance and institutional capacity as a priority, and how this is a dialogue fostering cooperation in that priority. And then Natia described the journey of Georgia in establishing technical working groups, national priorities, targets, indicators, having an SDG tracker, establishing the SDG Council, and essentially having a whole of government approach in doing this. And then over to Nino on collaboration for common good. She talked about the challenges and gaps on institutional setup, linkages, voluntary national review, and COVID-19 effects. And she discussed the needs and recommendations on ensuring public participation in policy development and transparency and accountability. And over to Ellen, who talked about the experience of the SDG Innovation Lab, how they made big data usable. Also, the establishment of the Sdg Monitor Platform, and how they plan to scale up in scope, geography, and innovation. And how they've also established a network of SDG champions, and how this has been an example of non-traditional and innovative financing mechanism. And on the Armenian experience of CSO involvement in achieving SDGs, they were involved in policy research, also CSO engagement and the roadmap. There were also views on the COVID-19 related projects and what perceptions have been by citizens, expectations of government. And the key question here is really, are stakeholders engaged in this process? And then over to Bruno on ADB's plans for mitigating COVID-19 effects. ADB is of course committed to SDGs, projects, country partnerships, tagging projects, and how localizing SDGs is critical in Asia Pacific. Financing for SDGs still remains to be a major challenge. Institutional capacity for data collection and monitoring remain weak. And then the CSO roles have been crucial in service delivery and disaster response, fostering citizen-centric governance, having innovative and sustainable solutions, and enhancing inclusion. And finally, everyone really revolved around the message on how collaboration is key to leaving no one behind. Thank you everyone for letting me draw the big picture with all of you for this session. Back to you, Georgie.
Thank you very much, Desiree, for such a lovely visualization, and to the whole Tofu Creatives team for providing the synthesis of our program, highlighting all the key topics discussed today, and for giving us the general visual summary once again for vast information shared between us today. Once again, thanks to you for making this such a lovely visualization. As part of the closing remarks, together with our panelists who contributed so much to our session, and I'm really grateful to all of you, I would like to express special thanks to the ADB, NGO and Civil Society Center, and the team of the ADB with whom we have been closely working during the last couple of months in order to ensure smooth delivery of this session. Idfi has a long experience working with ADB, long and smooth experience working with ADB, including on the topics of SDGs, and I really look forward to our continued cooperation in the future. We had a very good and pleasant support from the ADB team in preparation, and so once again, big thanks to you. And lastly, let me remind you that the video recording of this session will be available on the NGO and Civil Society Center Facebook and Dev Asia Knowledge Events page. Special thanks to the audience for being active, providing us with the questions, and for listening to us. Thanks to the interpreters, and have a very nice rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you all, and bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you to all of you, and
Bye-bye.